LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the May 28th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's dozen best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. There's no political comedy per se. Saturday Night Live and Bill Maher both off this week. Bill Maher's going to be back next week. Although I do kind of have a little political comedy with George Takei and Joy-Ann Reid from AM Joy this morning, where George Takei, Sulu from Star Trek, so welcome to the show, I should say. Sulu from Star Trek will be on as the first clip where he makes a Donald Trump joke about trolling, and the big topic of the show has Trump been trolled by Russia? We know that, Trump is such a big troll, and that's kind of part of George Takei's joke, so I guess it's like one of those old Yakov Smirnoff jokes, like, in Soviet Russia, government trolls Trump rather than Trump trolling us, or I guess we'll have to see. But there's a lot of big breaking news on the Russia scandal this week, which kind of eclipsed most of the other news. There was a little bit of coverage, but I'm just going to be covering the breaking Russia scandal, and I'm going to be comparing different clips, different news sources from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You can also follow along this is my clip list. There's a link down to it in the video description. I have the dozen clips I talked about. You can look at my notes and figure out who's talking, what the topics are, what they're talking about, sort of, if you can figure it out. But like I said, I want to start off with this great clip from this morning, George Takei and Joy-Ann Reid. First, Joy Reid admitting she is a Trekkie. You can see over my shoulder here, here's my Spock mug I've had ever since Leonard Nimoy died, and that is a topic that comes up again and again on my broadcast, so I wanted to start the show with this clip of George Takei with the introduction from Joy-Ann Reid talking about Donald Trump and trolling over here.
Fan of AM Joy, you already know that I am a huge Trekkie. Captain Kirk for life. Coming this fall is the latest iteration of the beloved Scenes, Star Trek Discovery, and it features Asian actress Michelle Yeoh as the captain and Sonequa Martin Green, Sasha from Walking Dead, if you are not aware, as her first officer. Awesome, 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 right? Well, some people not so happy as we are here on AM Joy, and they've gone so far as to call it white genocide in space. Seriously, joining me now to talk about talk about these shenanigans is actor and activist George Takei. Yes, George Takei. All right.
Live long and prosper.
Live long and prosper, my friend. First of all, George, we live at a time with so much madness going on. I mean, we talked in just a little break before the segment, or in the little mini segment, of actual hate crimes, racist hate crimes taking place around the country. And yet people are finding the time to hate on Star Trek for having diversity. What?
Well, today in this society, we have alien life forms that we call trolls. And these trolls carry on without knowing what they're talking about, and knowing even less about the history of what they're talking about. And some of these trolls go on to be presidents of nations.
George, for those few people, if you're watching this show, I hope that you are a Trekkie, and the original Star Trek is still the best Star Trek, even though I will see the new film. But Gene Roddenberry, when he created Star Trek, diversity, having you as Mr. Sulu on that set, having Ms. Uhura, Lieutenant Uhura as a part of that cast, wasn't diversity kind of the point?
Well, we had a guiding acronym, IDIC, IDIC, which stood for Infinite Diversity in Infinite Combinations. And we boldly went where we hadn't gone before because we were curious about what's out there. And when you go out into space, you're going to have even more, even greater diversity. And so diversity was the keynote. Now, these so-called trolls haven't seen a single episode of a new series because it hasn't been aired. Right. So there you are on one count. They have never seen what they're talking about. And they don't know the history of Star Trek. That, as you said, Gene Roddenberry created this with the idea of finding strength in our diversity. That's where, and also the delight of life in diversity. And so they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't know the history of Star Trek.
You come.
And that was a great interview that George Takei did. I put a link down to the full interview in the video description on the MSNBC website. I definitely recommend watching the whole thing. George Takei kind of talks about how he additionally trolled Donald Trump, trying to get him to come to this museum about the Japanese internment and talk about his Muslim ban and making people the other. And it's really powerful listening to the rest of that interview. But the whole thing about IDIC, the infinite diversity and infinite combination, that's the Vulcan philosophy. IDIC, that's how they used it in Star Trek. But in some ways it has to do with what some people call identity politics these days. Diversity is just making sure that everybody has a place. You know, different identities aren't like squashed and overlooked, and people can be proud of their identity without other people's pride oppressing other people's identity. It's it's all very that's why Star Trek was an aspirational show, and I like to hear George Takei talk about that. But that's not the only trolling that I'm talking about. Is the trolls, the alt-right trolls going after Star Trek Discovery. There's also this theory that Donald Trump is being trolled by Russia now, that they're planting false stories. I'm going to show this Lindsey Graham clip on that in a moment. But first I want to compare two different news outlets, the way they reported on what happened in the last week, the latest developments in the Russia scandal. The longer one, the best, as usual, is NBC's Meet the Press. Last week, NBC's Meet the Press was off because of soccer coverage. But still at the end of this week, Chuck Todd did say if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press. Even though last Sunday was Sunday, there was no Meet the Press. Kind of dishonesty from Chuck Todd there, but I didn't take that clip. I did take a couple, actually I think 4 clips from Meet the Press, including Chuck Todd's summary of the breaking news in the Russia scandal this last week. Almost 4 minutes long, and I'll discuss it with you after we watch it together here.
From his first overseas trip in office, and when he did, the Russia investigation got much closer to home as well. So much closer, in fact, that it now involves the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. President Trump faces a growing scandal that threatens to overshadow his agenda and perhaps his entire presidency. Just consider what has happened in just the last week. Monday, Washington Post reports that Mr. Trump had asked his intel chiefs in March to push back specifically on then FBI Director James Comey's comments on the Russia investigation. Tuesday, former CIA Director John Brennan testifies that he saw intelligence revealing contacts between Russian officials and Trump campaign members that he thought deserved investigation. Thursday, NBC News reports that Jared Kushner is now under FBI scrutiny in the Russia investigation, though he is not a target. And then late Friday night, the Washington Post bombshell that Kushner and Russia's ambassador to the United States discussed setting up a secret backdoor channel using Russian communication facilities so that their pre-inauguration discussions would not be picked up by U.S. monitoring. That last item was so explosive that the Trump administration went out of its way yesterday to field reporters' questions off camera, even if they didn't actually answer them.
We're not going to comment on Jared. We're just not going to comment.
National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster did try to defend Kushner without saying his name.
Generally speaking, about back-channel communications, what that allows you to do is to communicate in a discreet manner.
It's very concerning that they wanted to have these communications at Russian diplomatic facilities using Russian phone lines. That shows that they were really trying to conceal this from the Obama administration and from U.S. intelligence.
The reactions to the Kushner story include just simple shock from the intelligence community.
I can't keep out of my mind the thought that if an American intelligence officer had done anything like this, we'd consider it espionage.
Reuters is also reporting that Kushner had at least 3 previously undisclosed contacts with the Russian ambassador, including 2 phone calls before the election, sometime between April and November. Kushner's attorney did not deny the story, but responded this way. Mr. Kushner participated in thousands of calls in this time period. He has no recollection of the calls as described. On Thursday, NBC News reported that Kushner is under FBI scrutiny, though not a subject of the investigation like former Trump aides Paul Manafort and Michael Flynn. Also this week, former CIA Director John Brennan publicly acknowledged for the first time his concern that Trump campaign associates, wittingly or unwittingly, may have been cooperating with Russian operatives, though he says he saw no proof of collusion.
I saw information and intelligence that was worthy of investigation by the Bureau to determine whether or not such cooperation or collusion was taking place.
Now the Senate Intelligence Committee has asked President Trump's political organization to gather and produce all documents, emails, and phone records going back to his campaign's launch in June 2015. Mr. Kushner was also in charge of the campaign's data operation.
I think we knew exactly where our 14 million voters were that we needed in those key swing states. I mean, Jared was an incredible leader to help make this all happen, you know?
At home, the president will not be able to avoid questions as he did overseas, beginning with his own party in Congress, many of whom were already losing confidence in his ability to lead.
I think we have a situation on our hands where every few days there's a new revelation.
The idea that Congress continues to do nothing about Russia interference in our election is completely unacceptable to me. In the next work period, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that we sanction Russia for interfering in our election.
Former House Speaker John Boehner told an energy conference Wednesday that foreign policy aside, everything else he's done has been a complete disaster. Joining me now is...
So from a Democrat's point of view, someone like me who opposes pretty much everything that Trump wants to accomplish, except for, getting the American economy moving again and providing jobs, so, who can be against that? But most of his policy objectives, the way he wants to do that, and a lot of other things that have nothing to do with that, I'm very happy that his policy agenda has been a disaster, that the Russia trip or the Russia scandal has pretty much overshadowed everything he's tried to do, and the things he has tried to do have been really ineffective, from his executive orders that have been tied up in court and his inability to get the Congress to pass significant legislative there was the health care bill, the American Health Care Act, that made it through the House but looks dead in the Senate, and then his budget. Both those things were covered on the Sunday morning shows, but like I said, I didn't really want to cover them much, but I did want to show the way NBC sort of put them into the whole Russia scandal as things that are not getting done because of the Russia scandal, and we can hope that's true, because remember last week I had a super chat donation from a person pointing out that Democrats shouldn't focus too much on this Russia stuff and should focus more on getting rid of the Trump agenda and blocking the Trump agenda. And I'm hoping the Russia scandal does help block the Trump agenda. And by the way, I noticed I got a $10 contribution from Daniel here. Thank you to the live viewers who can give the super chat contributions. That's one way to make up for the lack of ads. Again, this week on a lot of my videos, even last week's video did not get monetized for a significant part of its viewing time, and it's having an uptick in views this weekend, last week's video, and I haven't seen ads playing on it. I don't know if you saw any ads. So the super chat donations like Daniel's there, the Live Long and Prosper, thank you very much for your support. And so that was the NBC report that I thought did a good job of rounding up the Jared Kushner news as the mainstream media focus. Like I said, later I'm going to show a different perspective that, especially from Lindsey Graham, they showed the work spouses, John McCain and Lindsey Graham specifically saying they have to take action on Russia. And he'll say that again, and you'll hear that echoed by another senator a little bit later, Bob Corker. But before I get to that, I want to contrast that NBC report with the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos report, where permanent guest or co-host Martha Raddatz was hosting, and she gave this report where she not only said there's like a shadow over the presidency almost, but she put it in context in such a way that you'll see a subsequent guest actually refers to the context. Adam Schiff, who I think is the leading Democrat on this Russia scandal investigation. And first here's the ABC report, and then I'll show Adam Schiff's reference to the context that ABC creates for the scandal over in this clip.
Deepening political crisis over the Russia connection. Through all the investigations, all the dramatic headlines, all the shifting stories about Russia's election interference and the Trump campaign's possible role in it, the president has been clear about one thing, consistently saying that he never colluded with Russia to alter the course of the presidential election. And let's be clear, he's right. We have seen no evidence of collusion between Trump and Russia during the campaign. But what we do have this weekend is a new shadow of suspicion now falling on Trump's most powerful, closest, and most influential advisor, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The Washington Post headline, Russian ambassador told Moscow that Kushner wanted a secret communications channel with Kremlin. The Post reporting Kushner wanted to use Russian equipment and Russian diplomatic facilities. That one quickly followed by the New York Times. Kushner is said to have discussed a secret channel to talk to Russia. ABC News has confirmed that Kushner did indeed meet with the Russian ambassador last December to talk about setting up a private back channel. Sources stressing that the conversation with the president's son-in-law was focused on the U.S. response to the crisis in Syria and other policy-related matters. While that may be true, pause for a moment to consider the context here. We know from the U.S. intelligence community that Russians meddled in the U.S. election with the goal of weakening Hillary Clinton and propping up Donald Trump. We know that after Trump's victory, Russia was political poison, a hostile power accused of undermining the foundations of our democracy. So in that environment, Jared Kushner's actions were, at best, highly unusual. And while his actions do not prove the election collusion that Trump has repeatedly denied, there are 3 congressional committees, the FBI, and now a special counsel, all intensely looking at every single allegation of impropriety, every one opening up the possibility of new subpoenas and more people interviewed under oath. And as the allegations now focus on the president's own son-in-law, a man whose West Wing office sits just feet away from the Oval Office, the risk to the president gets ever more serious. So let's bring in our chief.
And if you go down to a link in the video description I put to the This Week with George Stephanopoulos program, you can go watch their reporters talk about what they've learned about the scandal. But I didn't take any clips from that. I think Martha Raddatz did a good job talking about both the developments this week and then putting it in context of what was going on at the time that these Russia contacts were happening. And it was actually, you saw, like 90 seconds shorter than the NBC clip, but I think it got all the information in there and possibly even more in terms of the context. And I specifically wanted to show that one of the reasons I like to show those introductory news stories from these Sunday morning news analysis shows is because the guests they have on, the newsmakers that I'm reporting on and commenting and criticizing, analyzing, those newsmakers actually most often will watch the introductory news pieces on the programs on which they are appearing. And you can see Representative Adam Schiff, who, like I said, he's in the House of Representatives. I don't know who the leader of the Democratic Party is right now, but Adam Schiff is doing a good job of being the leader on the Russia investigation because he's on the House Intelligence Committee. And you can see him here, I think, make the strongest argument for why this whole Jared Kushner contact, the use of back channels isn't, innocent communications, as you'll see people from the Trump administration try to argue a little bit later. And Adam Schiff does this really cool thing where he uses the news reporting from Martha Raddatz at the beginning of the show, the idea of the context of what was happening, to parry her confrontational questions. And I'll discuss that a little more with you after we watch that clip together over here.
Reaction to reports that Jared Kushner tried to set up a secret back channel with the Russians.
Well, of course, I can't confirm or deny whether they're accurate, but if they are, it's obviously very concerning. And as you said at the top of the show, it's all about the context. John Brennan testified this week that what concerned him wasn't simply that the Russians were having contact with people associated with the Trump campaign, that the Russians have contacts with Americans quite routinely, but it was the context of an election campaign in which the Russians had been intervening to help Donald Trump, to hurt Hillary Clinton. And of course, if these reports are accurate, right after that campaign, after that intervention, to have the president's son-in-law, a key player within the Trump organization, trying to establish a back channel with the Russians through a Russian diplomatic facility, you have to ask, well, who are they hiding the conversations from?
Well, you're talking about context. So it would be okay if it was a back channel if all this other context hadn't happened. I know H.R. McMaster, the president's national security advisor, said he was not concerned about back channel communications. Historically, there have been back channels.
You know, I was disappointed to see the general say that. I have a lot of respect for him. Sadly, I think this is an administration that takes in people with good credibility and chews them out and spits out their credibility at the same time. Yes, that's true in the abstract, what General McMaster said.
You're saying he's lost his credibility?
No, but I think that anyone within the Trump orbit is at risk of being used. And what the general said here, that may be true in the context where you're trying to arrange secret talks with the Taliban to negotiate a peaceful resolution, or you're trying to achieve the release of hostages. But for people associated with a campaign, after that campaign has ended, and where the Russians during that campaign were helping you to try to establish a back channel and hide it from your own government, that's
the New York Times and ABC
allegation.
News have both reported that the talks were about Syria, about the crisis in Syria and other policy matters.
Well, that I don't think necessarily mitigates this, because of course, the Russians have their own object in Syria, very different than ours. They want to prop up Bashar al-Assad. Our policy, at least at that time, if these allegations are correct, was very much in opposition to the Russian policy. And if American policy was going to change for the wrong reason, that is, as a thank you to their intervention in the campaign, obviously that's very problematic, just as problematic as it would have been if the conversation was on relief of the sanctions over Ukraine. Now, again, this is all in the category of allegation, but it is something that our committee needs to get to the bottom of, as well as Bob Mueller.
Had your committee, can I ask you, seen?
So that's actually a pretty conservative approach from the leading Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee investigating this whole Russia scandal. And I think it's still pretty conventional that it's assuming that there is a lot of scandal there to investigate. And I want to contrast it to this really interesting counter-argument I heard from Senator Lindsey Graham this morning over on CNN's State of the Union. Dana Bash was substitute hosting for Jake Tapper this morning. And, you know, sometimes I talk about how these politicians and other newsmakers who appear on these programs, that they come on with their answers and it really doesn't matter what the question is. They want to get out a specific talking point. And this isn't so much talking. This is pretty heavy stuff here from Senator Lindsey Graham, but he obviously had something he wanted to talk about that basically has nothing to do with what Dana Bash was asking about. First, she asked about the Jared Kushner story, and this is, I think, the strongest argument that Trump and the United States is being trolled by Russia, because he brings up this story that wasn't, you notice it wasn't in the ABC news report, it wasn't in the NBC news report, and CNN didn't really do a news report and never reported on this CNN story that Lindsey Graham brings up about how James Comey did his extraordinary press conference in July, where he said that he wasn't going to bring charges against Hillary Clinton, but he said that Hillary Clinton was a very, very bad record holder or whatever. He, was very extremely careless, or I think was the words that he used. But the reason he did that, apparently, according to the CNN story, was because of a fake Russia intercepted email, or they had this report from Russia that they had intercepted emails from the DNC that said that Attorney General Loretta Lynch was going to lay off the email scandal, and that's why James Comey had to take over that. So I'm sorry, that's all the background here for what Lindsey Graham is going to spend 5 minutes bringing that up. But I want to bring up again. I want to 3 times he brings this up, even though it's not anything Dana Bash is even talking about. She's talking about the tax returns. She's talking about Jared Kushner, and that's what Lindsey Graham wants to talk about. This has got to be the clip of the week, I think. This is Lindsey Graham being his Grammyest best, I guess. His melodramatic Southern Belle best, if that's what Bill Maher calls him sometimes. But here's Lindsey Graham talking about how Russia is actually trolling us and trolling Trump with fake news, and misinformation over here.
Let's turn to the bombshell report from the Washington Post that Jared Kushner and the Russian ambassador discussed the possibility of setting up secret communications channel with Moscow. And Evan McMullin, the former Republican staffer who had a brief run for president, he tweeted that the report is, quote, treasonous activity, whether born of malice, naivete, or both. Do you see it that way?
Well, number one, we're chasing our tails as a nation when it comes to the Russians. I don't know who leaked this supposed conversation, but just think about it this way. You got the ambassador to Russia reporting back to Moscow on an open channel, hey, Jared Kushner is going to move into the embassy. I don't trust this story as far as I can throw it.
In what way? Why don't you trust it?
I think it makes no sense that the Russian ambassador would report back to Moscow on a channel that he most likely knows we're monitoring. The whole storyline is suspicious. I've never been more concerned and suspicious about all things Russia than I am right now. So I'm not going to jump to the conclusion that Mr. McMullin jumped to.
So you think that it is possible that what the ambassador Kislyak said to Moscow was on purpose because he knew that he was being monitored?
That's a possibility. Well, look at it this way. Apparently, the FBI director intervened in the elections in July 2016 based on a fake email generated by the Russians from the Democrats to the Department of Justice trying to shut down the email investigation of Clinton. If that was fake, why don't you think this is fake? I'm not so sure the email that Comey relied upon was fake, but I can tell you this. He never briefed the Congress, the Judiciary Committee, about any fake email. What he told the Intelligence Committee about this email, he never suggested it was fake. So if he intervened in the election based on fake information generated by the Russians, that was an incredibly incompetent thing to do. So I don't really know who to believe anymore.
You said recently that you want to know more about President Trump's business dealings and any potential ties to Russia. Is it time to subpoena the president's tax return, Senator?
We're not there yet, but I do want to know where they got their money in 2008 and 9 when most people were struggling with their real estate investments. But back to Comey. This is a huge deal. There's a report out now by CNN that the FBI director knew that the information he relied upon to jump into the 2016 election was fake, that he basically took over the Department of Justice's job based on a fake email from the Russians. That, to me, is a stunning story. From a Congress's point of view, he never told us it was fake, so he needs to be held accountable. And if it is not fake, we need another investigation.
Senator, if I may follow up, because that was our reporting, he allegedly didn't tell Congress it was fake or not, or didn't matter to him whether or not he told Congress is one thing. That's separate, because
matters to me.
Because he felt that he couldn't talk about it anyway because it would give up sources and methods. You don't buy that?
No, because he did talk to Congress about it. He didn't talk to the Judiciary Committee. He talked to members of the Senate and House Intel Committee that he was sitting on emails that the Russians had between the Democratic Party and the Department of Justice that were highly explosive. That was the main reason he jumped in July to take over the investigation, because he thought the Department of Justice was compromised, and he never once told a member of the House or the Senate that he thought the email was fake. If he did, in fact, believe it was fake, he should have shared that with the Congress, because we have oversight over him. I can't imagine a scenario where it's okay for the FBI director to jump in the middle of an election based on a fake email generated by the Russians and not tell the Congress.
Can I just follow up on what I asked you about tax returns? You're talking about the fact that you have a lot of doubts about the issues and the questions surrounding the president and his aides and so forth. But a tax document should not be something that is questionable. It is a legal document. So why is it too soon to take a look at those tax returns and use your power in Congress to subpoena them?
Number one, I don't have any business dealing before me between the Trump organization and Russia that seems to be inappropriate. Do I want to look and see if they are? Yes. Now we got the special counsel. I don't want to get in his lane. The special counsel, Mr. Mueller, has independent responsibilities to investigate all things Russia. So does the Congress. We need a deconfliction meeting. But I want to get back to the idea that the FBI director's decision to jump into the election and say that Hillary Clinton did not commit a crime, but she was pretty much incompetent, was based on a fake email from Russia. He never told anybody in Congress, which is stunning. And at the end of the day, if the Russians are this sophisticated, we need more sanctions yesterday against the Russians. Or is, in fact, this a true email? I want to get to the bottom of it. I want to see the email.
Before I let you go...
So that was Lindsey Graham there. I was reading the live comments right before I went back to, before I finished the clip. I saw Michael Ballard down in the live comments. I didn't have a chance to take a screen capture saying that Lindsey Graham is all about deception, but I don't know whether what he's saying is true or not. He's speculating at the possibility, and what he says about that Comey story is actually true. I mean, one way or another, there's a big scandal there. Either James Comey based his whole press conference that affected the Hillary Clinton campaign on a fake Russia, getting trolled by Russia, basically, or that's a fake story and he wasn't trolled by Russia, but the CNN story is fake. And why is there this fake CNN story that James Comey got trolled by Russia into criticizing the Clinton campaign because he was afraid Loretta Lynch had been compromised? So I think either way, there is a story there that Lindsey Graham was correct to bring up. Now, whether he's correct that this whole Jared Kushner thing is Russian trolling and, Russian misinformation, I don't know whether that's true or not. How am I supposed to know? But one thing I would say is in this next clip, Representative Adam Schiff, who I said earlier is basically the leading Democrat on this scandal, or one of the leading Democrats anyway, because he's on the House Intelligence Committee. His argument here, I think, is a little weak. I mean, he doesn't deny that Russia is sophisticated and could do, after trying to help Trump get elected president, could then start putting out this misinformation to hurt Trump because now he's the president of the United States and their ultimate aim is to hurt the United States. That doesn't really contradict the earlier story unless you really believe that it's like Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are buddies in secret and colluding together, which that's not the story that I believe. But Adam Schiff then says he can't understand why Russians would undermine Trump when I think there's because he's president of the United States and Russia doesn't have good intentions for the United States. That's the weakness in Adam Schiff's argument, trying to sort of contradict what Senator Lindsey Graham said in that last clip. Here's the Adam Schiff clip, and I'll talk about it a little bit more after we watch together here.
Through monitoring of Ambassador Kislyak that this was discovered. Ambassador Kislyak has to know that he's monitored all the time. So could this be a ruse on the part of the Russians? Can you see any explanation why they would try to put this information out or get this information out or talk to each other thinking we'll think Kushner's involved, but he isn't?
Again, I don't want to comment too much beyond what is alleged here. Certainly in dealings with the Russians, they're very sophisticated. You always have to take into consideration that the Russians may be doing things that are designed to throw you off the track or provoke discord. They're very sophisticated, so I don't think you can rule anything out.
Can you see a reason? It's confusing to me why they would do this. It was back in December. Jared Kushner was not in government yet. Didn't even have a security clearance.
Well, it's hard to understand if these allegations are correct, why this would be some kind of a Russian ruse. Why would they want to undermine the very government that they hope to have a good relationship with, the incoming Trump administration? So I'm not sure you can see a motive for a ruse here. But again, all of this is still within the category of allegation. I do think ultimately we're going to want Mr. Kushner to come before our committee. I fully expect that will happen. I'm sure that Mr. Mueller is going to want to look into these allegations as well.
Do you think because of these allegations she should stay in the White House?
So Adam Schiff can't figure out a motive why Russia would want to undermine a president who they want to have good relations with. Well, because they may want to pretend to have good relations with the U.S. president, but Russia's ultimate aim, and you'll hear James Clapper say this in a later clip, and I don't think Vladimir Putin wants the United States to, be strong and, as strong as possible and have the best possible future. I think he sees the United States as a rival, and I'll talk about that a little more when I show John Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, talk about NATO in a clip near the end. And but before I get to that, I want to show, having just criticized Adam Schiff for not having a strong argument as to why this couldn't be Russian trolling, now I want to criticize a Trump administration official for not understanding why this whole back channel looks very suspicious, which I think it does look suspicious if it is a true story. And this is John Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security, who says, you know, all communication is good. There's no such thing as bad communication. And he was on a few different shows. I wanted to show the clip from Fox News Sunday just because I wanted to criticize the follow-up from Chris Wallace, where he mentions that this was during the transition, not while Trump was actually president, but he doesn't mention that it was supposedly going to happen at the Russian embassy using like Russian communication facilities, and that seems like an obvious follow-up to any communication is good communication, and that's sort of the Trump talking points that you can see from John Kelly, Secretary of Homeland Security, talking to Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday this morning in clip number 7 over here.
Get to terror. Let me ask you about the hot story in Washington now. These revelations about Jared Kushner trying to set up some kind of back channel to the Kremlin through the Russian ambassador. Your reaction to that? Is there anything improper with that?
Well, I don't know if it's true or not. I know it's being reported in the press. But
it has been confirmed to me the conversation took place.
Then I would just tell you, Chris, that I think any channel of communication, back or otherwise, with a country like Russia is a good thing. I mean, multiple ways to communicate back and forth is a good thing with any country, I think, and particularly a country that's like Russia. It doesn't bother me. I mean, you just have to assume, obviously, that what you're getting is may or may not be true. They may be working you, but that's the whole point. I mean, then that communication then goes into the White House as a data point in terms of discussion. So well, I don't see a big deal.
You say you don't see a big deal?
No, I think any time you have channels of communication with a country, particularly one like Russia, I wouldn't criticize it.
But you talked about a data point into the White House. This is during the transition. These were private officials.
Sure.
We have one president at a time. Does that make a difference?
You know, I mean, obviously during the transition period, the people in transition, the incoming Trump administration is not in a position to do anything to inhibit what the Obama administration literally days before they transitioned out. Again, as they begin to build relationships, there's nothing wrong with that. As they begin to build their own situational awareness with Russia in this case, I don't see an issue here.
Okay, let's turn.
So I think that argument was even weaker than Adam Schiff's argument. And I mean, any communication is good communication, and you know the whole thing about how where incoming administration is almost president. No mention, of course, of the Logan Act, but Chris Wallace did not mention the whole idea of the Russian facilities and how that makes things look especially suspicious. And I'm going to show a couple clips about that. The first, they're both from James Clapper, who was the head of he was Director of National Intelligence all the way up till Obama left office on January 20th. And the first thing I want to show is he also talks about whether Russia could be engaging in misinformation, and specifically uses the word trolls to refer to the fake news that Russia puts out. And then later he'll talk about how there should be a warning light on how when he was Director of National Intelligence and he heard about what Jared Kushner was doing, that he definitely got a warning light on his dashboard. But that's the second clip. The first clip is about Russian misinformation and trolls, which I will talk about with you after we watch that James Clapper answer to questioning from Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
Caveats in the Washington Post bombshell story was that the Russians frequently will do misinformation, even in intel channels. How often does that happen? How likely is it in this case?
Well, it happens a lot. It happens overtly and covertly, and certainly that was one of the tools that the Russians used in the run-up to our election, was fake news, misinformation, paying trolls to insert phony information in social media. And so this is a standard practice of the Russians and the Soviets before them.
If Jared Kushner's meeting with somebody that you referred to as sort of oversees a large intelligence operation, and while you said you didn't see any smoking gun on collusion, how close to the line is that in your mind?
Well, it certainly arouses your concern about what's going on. Given, Russia, at least for my money, is our primary adversary. They are not our friends. They are in to do us in. And I have to say as well, Chuck, we have a kind of a time-honored custom in this country that we have one president, one administration at a time. And oncoming administrations don't get a head start before the end of the current president's incumbency.
What would...
So I think James Clapper's answer there was the best refutation of what you saw from John Kelly earlier, that any communication is good communication, not necessarily so when you're talking about our primary adversary. And he, I think, also went on in this next clip to talk specifically. He's talking in like the subjunctive tense about, because he's not allowed to give away any confidential or classified information. And so he's talking, if that were true, then warning lights would have been going off on my dashboard. And but I think you can pretty much get the gist of what James Clapper thinks, to the extent you trust James Clapper. And I'll talk a little bit about why maybe you shouldn't trust James Clapper after we watched the second and final James Clapper clip I wanted to show you from NBC's Meet the Press, talking to Chuck Todd this morning about... where Chuck Todd asked, would you have known about this if it were happening while you were Director of National Intelligence all the way until January 20th? And yes, he would have known, and it would have really bothered him if he could reveal what he's not revealing, but you can pretty much tell he's revealing in this clip.
The issue that has been the bombshell this weekend, this issue that Jared Kushner, at the time private citizen, yes, a private advisor at the time to the president-elect, was having these meetings with the ambassador to Russia, Sergei Kislyak, and they hid these meetings from public eye. We also learned that he met with the head of a sanctioned Russian bank. You were still the Director of National Intelligence in December. Are these things that you would have known?
Well, yes, they would have. And just to reinforce John Brennan's former Director of Central Intelligence Agency, his comments before the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And I have to say that without specifically affirming or confirming these conversations, since even though they're in the public realm, they're still classified. But just from a theoretical standpoint, I will tell you that my dashboard warning light was clearly on, and I think that was the case with all of us in the intelligence community, very concerned about the nature of these approaches to the Russians. If you put that in context with everything else we knew the Russians were doing to interfere with the election, and just the historical practices of the Russians, who typically almost genetically driven to co-opt, penetrate, gain favor, whatever, which is a typical Russian technique. So we were concerned.
And this is what's likely triggered the FBI's now extra attention to Jared Kushner, that we've been reporting that they believe he has more information. They're saying he's not a target. It would have been intelligence like this that would have triggered it?
Well, I think so. And I think John alluded to his concerns that he expressed to the FBI, which is the proper channel. I have to say, at the time I left, I did not see any smoking gun certitude evidence of collusion, but it certainly was appropriate for, given all the signs, certainly appropriate for the FBI to, and necessary for the FBI to investigate.
Sergei Kislyak,
So there you see James Clapper talking in, like I said, hypothetical terms about things he actually knows, which is always a little bit weird. And for those who've been watching my Sunday live clip roundup for a long time, back at the very beginning were the Edward Snowden revelations, which made it look like James Clapper had actually lied to Congress while like rubbing his head furiously. A terrible tell if he plays poker, I think, but about whether the NSA was collecting information on millions of Americans, and he said not wittingly, but of course they were doing it wittingly. So that's one reason why not everything James Clapper says maybe should be taken as the absolute truth. I just wanted to point that out before I get on to my last three clips here, which is two Republicans trying to sort of defend the latest news on the Russia scandal with Trump. And then at the end, I'll have one Democrat, Senator Cory Booker, talking about impeachment. And then I will also show the results of last week's poll on whether Donald Trump will finish out his term. And then also up in the corner here, you can see this week's poll about whether the Russia scandal, the growing Russia scandal in the Trump administration, is the result of wrongdoing by the Trump administration, or Russian misinformation and trolling, or maybe it's the deep state and the liberal media, or some combination thereof. So you can tell me which of those answers best represents your views on this growing Russia scandal in the Trump administration. And I'll talk about that just a little more when I get to the Cory Booker clip at the end, where Dana Bash says she's not criticizing people talking about impeachment, even though Jake Tapper criticized it last week, and I think she is criticizing it. But before I get to that, two Republicans. First, this is the Secretary of Defense. This is Senator Bob Corker from the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's taking like a different way to avoid answering questions about the Jared Kushner revelations this week, where he's decided to say, well, Jared Kushner's people talked to me before I came on your show, and he's willing to answer any questions. He hasn't answered any questions yet, but he told me he's willing, so that should clear anything up, and go talk to Jared Kushner, which is basically what you'll see Bob Corker say in this next clip for a little bit, almost 4 minutes, trying to get away with that answer, but then also talking about what Lindsey Graham talked about in that news report earlier about how in this next work session, the Senate is definitely going to go ahead with sanctions on Russia, which I will talk about a little more with you after we watch that clip together here.
The allegations involving Jared Kushner and these meetings that he had where he either he suggested or somebody suggested that a back channel be put together in some form, possibly using Russian facilities. Can you think of any good reason to do something like that in a transition period between one presidency over another?
Look, I think Jared has said that he's more than willing to answer any and all questions. They reached out to us yesterday to make sure that we knew that was the case, and I'm sure he's willing to do so. I look at what the reports have said about asking questions of him. It seems to me that he's, based on just the reporting that you and others are making, he's not a target, and so I think I would just wait. It sounds like he's more than glad to talk about all of these things, and instead of getting wrapped up into a lot of hyperbole, as these things can sometimes do, I think talking with him directly and getting him to answer any and all questions, as he said he would do, would probably be the prudent course of action.
I understand that, but can you think of any good reason? Let's take, as you know, you had the Washington Post bombshell, and then clearly, while the White House hasn't said much publicly, they seem to be talking anonymously to the New York Times, and they implied that, well, the meeting, it wasn't clear who suggested a back channel, and that it was going to involve Mike Flynn and Syria. Here's what I don't understand. Why would anybody want to set up something like that if it was about Syria and not let the Pentagon know about it?
Yeah, I have no idea. Again, I think it's best to talk directly with these people. I know that from a military standpoint, obviously, we have ways of deconflicting with Russia on things relative to Syria. Again, Chuck, because I just don't know. I mean, these sources are not people who are willing to give their names. It's just hard to respond to things like this that, again, you know, no names attached, no dates attached. Look, let's let this unfold. And as I've spent a lot of time with Jared, he was over just recently in a bipartisan way briefing us on the upcoming trip. They achieved all of their goals. He seems to me to be a very open person. And again, I'd let him speak for himself when the time is right on all these issues. And at that time, we can actually render judgment on the reality of what did or didn't take place.
The time is right. I guess I'm a little concerned. Do you not have a sense of urgency about this? Let's think about the time period here. You just had 17 intelligence agencies report that Russia interfered in this election. These interactions in the month of December, Senator Corker, you would think would trouble many people if they thought that, geez, there's been accusations that maybe the Russians were trying to assist one campaign or the other, and then to have these meetings and then to have them talk about the idea of avoiding American eavesdropping, I guess, if you want to call it that. None of this troubles you? I mean, you want to wait till it unfolds?
No, Chuck.
Okay.
Listen, these recent reports is what I'm talking about. I mean, again, as I understand it, Jared Kushner's more than glad to talk about all of these things as it relates to the interference in the election, no question. And as you know, we've been allowing for a short period of time for Secretary of State Tillerson to see if he can change the trajectory in Syria. But this next work period, we very much, unless there's some major change in Russia's actions in Syria, plan to double down on sanctions with Russia. No, so absolutely not. Couldn't agree more with that. So I'm not disagreeing that they interfered with our elections and we need to do something about that. So if you're trying to tie me into that,
I'm not trying to tie you into
100%.
I'm not trying to tie you into knots, but
So that'll be an interesting thing to look forward to in the next work session that the Senate has after they get back from their recess. And Lindsey Graham talked about this too, that might cause them to butt heads with the Trump administration. Apparently, Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, asked the Senate to hold off on new sanctions against Russia until they could see if they could get Russia to change their behavior on Syria, which Chuck Todd then goes and asks Bob Corker about. And I didn't take that additional clip. You can watch the whole show, as usual, down in the video description. I have two more clips. The first one is actually, this is a Trump administration official, Secretary of Defense John Mattis, who did an exclusive interview on CBS's Face the Nation, which took place yesterday, Saturday, after this whole Jared Kushner scandal broke as part of the Russia scandal. And you'll see John Dickerson did not even do what you saw Chuck Todd do with Bob Corker there, and you saw in the John Kelly interview. In all three shows, John Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security, was asked about the Jared Kushner story. John Dickerson did not ask about the Jared Kushner story, even though a couple pundits, including one on CBS's Face the Nation, brought up the fact that John Mattis had already been nominated as Secretary of Defense at the time these meetings took place. So if they were really about Syria policy, he should have been involved in the discussions, in these back-channel discussions with Russia, which apparently he wasn't. But John Dickerson never asked about that. In fact, this 83-second clip from CBS's Face the Nation is the only question that John Dickerson asked John Mattis, the Secretary of Defense, about Russia. Not very confrontational over here.
The Russians want.
Beats me. Right now, Russia's future should be wedded to Europe. Why they see NATO as a threat is beyond me. Clearly, NATO is not a threat, but right now, Russia is choosing to be a strategic competitor for any number of reasons, but the bottom line is NATO is not a threat, and they know it. They have no doubt about it.
You've said that Russia is trying to break apart NATO. Is the United States going to take any action to deal with Russia as a threat to NATO, either in helping in the Balkans or in any other way?
right now we are dealing with Russia, attempting to deal with Russia under President Trump's direction in a diplomatic manner. At the same time, while willing to engage diplomatically, we are going to have to confront Russia when it comes to areas where they attack us, whether it be with cyber or they try to change borders using armed force. And that's admittedly a strategically uncomfortable position, engaging diplomatically, trying to find a way out of this situation, but confronting them where we must. And we are going to continue in this mode, and hopefully soon our diplomats will work their magic and start moving us out of this quandary we find ourselves in.
Let me ask you about the Paris.
Now, first of all, I think it's kind of silly for someone not to be able to see how Russia might not see NATO as their friend, why Russia is threatened by NATO, given that they have taken in a bunch of former Warsaw Pact nations and have kind of encircled Russia and the Russia's Confederation of States or whatever they call it. I can't even remember what it's called these days, but I thought that was kind of a silly argument from John Mattis, but the Secretary of Defense. But I thought it was really poor questioning from John Dickerson. Maybe it was some sort of ground rule, or I don't know why. But John Dickerson, host of CBS's Face the Nation, did not ask why or even if John Mattis was consulted on the whole Jared Kushner back channel, supposedly about U.S. and Russia deconflicting their policies on Syria, which the Secretary of Defense definitely should have been involved with. So I think that was poor questioning by CBS's Face the Nation. And by the way, regarding CBS, you should all know that there's a significant chance that for the next few weeks I may not be able to live stream because by June 1st, CBS is going to decide whether they're going to give me a copyright strike for a few clips I took of their interview with Donald Trump back almost a month ago now. And I think it's likely that they will give me the strike, and so I'll still do the show. I'll record it and upload it. Hopefully it won't happen. It's up to CBS. That's why I think I definitely did fair use criticism and political analysis regarding that last CBS and only CBS clip I decided to use this week. And for the final clip of the week, as I promised, I want to show a clip about impeachment. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey talking to Dana Bash on CNN's State of the Union. And if you remember last week, I asked the poll question, do you think that Donald Trump is going to finish his term? Will Donald Trump finish a full term as president? You'll see 85% of you said no, he won't finish his term. 14% said yes, he will finish his term. That I can't tell you which one's right or wrong because it's a prediction of the future. But as I said, I have a poll question about the Russian trolling or the Russian scandal, whether it's more the result of Trump wrongdoing, Russian misinformation and trolling, or the liberal media and the deep state. Those are your three different possibilities. You can answer right up there. And on the issue of impeachment, which was the subject last week, you saw last week Jake Tapper sort of made it sound like he was being critical of the idea of impeachment. And Cory Booker here says, we have to wait for all the evidence. But Dana Bash is really clear. Did she watch my show last week? I highly doubt it. But it seems like she did, the way she's saying, we're not criticizing the idea of impeachment. We're just asking questions here. So that I can't criticize Dana Bash this week like I criticized Jake Tapper, seeming to criticize the idea of impeachment. And you can see Cory Booker's answer for the final clip tonight over here.
Clinton reemerged this week with a major speech at Wellesley College, and she talked about the mood on the campus back in 1969 when she was still a student. Take a listen.
We were furious about the past presidential election of a man whose presidency would eventually end in disgrace with his impeachment for obstruction of justice. After firing the person running the investigation into him at the Department of Justice.
Now, to be clear, Nixon was never impeached by the full House. He resigned before that happened. But present time, are Democrats getting ahead of themselves by imagining the demise of Trump's presidency?
Well, first of all, cut Secretary Clinton some slack.
people who might want to rush to criticize or listen to the whole speech. It was a very beautiful speech, many inspiring words for folks, and we often take little sound bites out.
No, and
this was a,
to be clear, that wasn't a criticism.
Speech by
that
a
was
woman with an incredible career.
That wasn't a criticism. That was a question about whether you agreed.
Oh, I just want to tell you right now, I'm not going to rush to impeachment. I think we need to deal with this in a very sobered way. This can't be a relitigation of an election that is now passed. This has to be about an objective assessment about the facts that are going on right now. And all I know is I'm very satisfied that we have an independent investigation now going on through the Justice Department, as well as both houses seem to be moving, not as fast as I'd like, but moving towards independent congressional investigations. We need to make sure that the United States of America is protected. Nobody disagrees with the fact that the Russians attacked us in terms of their cyber attacks, and we need to get to the bottom of what happened. And if there were Americans that colluded with the Russians to undermine our democratic processes, they should be held to account.
Senator Cory Booker, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
So, yeah, I think Senator Cory Booker took the reasonable Democratic position, you know, the wait-and-see position, because there's so much in terms of rumors and innuendo and anonymous press reports, as you saw in all the previous clips, that you need hard evidence, and I think that's the correct position. And I thought it was interesting, like I said before I showed the clip, that Dana Bash was so clear that she's not criticizing, she's just asking questions. And you can let me know what you think about that down in the comment section. I appreciate all the live viewers who joined me along the way, especially the people who made the super chat contributions. I showed that one, the Live Long and Prosper one earlier. I also wanted to show this nice comment I got from Turtle Tracks. I don't know, maybe that was too small, but saying I'm a good news source and that dissent is patriotic. I appreciate that contribution. And then one of the people who I've sent out my hashtag LiberalViewer candles to here. I wanted to show that. I don't know, again, maybe too small to read, but one of my Canadian viewers, I've sent out a few Canadian candles, and that was a nice super chat contribution to defray the high cost of sending the candles out to Canada, so I appreciate that. This is your last chance for the live viewers to give me one of those super chat contributions. That also helps defray the lack of advertising. And also, before I leave, for the Sandy fans out there, I wanted to show this picture I took of Sandy sort of settling in during some of the clips tonight. Also, these are the labels that I put around the hashtag LiberalViewer candles. Sandy in the doorway, so that's the show for tonight. I hope you appreciated all the clips I picked out on the topic of the Russia scandal and whether Russia is trolling Trump. You can let me know what you think about that. You can let me know what you think about the poll as to the source of the Russia scandal, whether it's really the Trump administration's fault or Russian trolling or some combination of the liberal media and the deep state. And I don't know whether I'll have a chance to make an edited, produced video this week. It seems somewhat unlikely for a variety of reasons, but I will be back next week with another edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, probably about the Russia scandal again, the way things have been going. And if you want to help support my efforts you can do it, like I said, through those super chat contributions or through becoming a Patreon at a link down in the video description. And also just by giving me a thumbs up or supportive comment. I've been getting a lot of those this week that I also appreciate. And I guess until my next video or until next week's Sunday Live Clip Roundup, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.